Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where we bring the mind, body, and gym together so you can improve your health, increase performance, and live your best life. For more information, visit thinkfitnesslife.com. Here are your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie.
Welcome back to the Think Fitness Life podcast, Mindset, Exercise, Nutrition with your hosts Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. Today is a very special episode. We got the chance to interview Adam Hill, who recently completed a book called Shifting Gears: From Anxiety and Addiction to a Triathlon World Championship. And in this book, he talks about his struggles with addiction, his unhealthy habits, and how he was able to transform that energy and his fear and his anxiety into the fuel that led him to complete multiple Ironmans and eventually his overall goal of completing the Kona Ironman in Hawaii.
Well, I mean, I'm all game about talking about the book, but yeah, I mean, my goal in sharing this story is really to give people hope that might not have had that in the past, that have gone through their own experience of just feeling hopeless, of feeling, whether it be an addiction, whether it be mental health issue, or anything that may feel like a limitation, especially the ones that are in our mind, that we can overcome those. We can. It is that things are possible that we didn't used to think were possible for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so powerful. And yeah, let's just continue with that. I think it's a great place to start. I mean, being so down in the dumps or being so stuck in your head, it can just have that negative spiral effect. And like you said, you kind of lose the ability to believe that you can even get out of it. Let's talk a little bit about, if you're okay with it, kind of the demons or the negative cycles and habits you were falling into.
Absolutely. Well, they started early for me. When I was really young, before I even knew I had an anxiety disorder, which is really kind of the root of where my mental health issues began. I was always kind of a bit of a spaz, and a real non-athlete. Like whenever I tried to get on like a sports ball field or something like that, I would really just embarrass myself. I was very awkward and had a lot of social anxiety, I guess, before that was even really a term. Right. So it took me a while to get out of my shell, but really the anxiety started to manifest in the form of panic attacks, and it became very apparent when I got into college. And at that same time, when you go into college, you also a lot of us, at least me, start drinking and start to experiment on things like that. I certainly did. And it's really a chicken or the egg argument as far as which became problematic first, the anxiety or the drinking. But both did become a problem in my life, and both fed off of each other. So I did start drinking, and it got progressively worse over the course of my college, and the panic attacks got even worse over the course of my younger life, to the point where they were debilitating. I would struggle with school. I would really just, it was paralyzing fear that I really battled over that time. And it really dominated my life for more than a decade.
What did one of those panic attacks feel like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember my first one really vividly, was when I was doing nothing more. I was just studying for an organic chemistry exam, which obviously that is panic inducing.
Yeah, just hearing the topic can give panic attacks, right?
Right. But having never experienced one before, it just randomly came into my head, this weird putting of pieces of puzzles together that didn't exist. I was dating a girl at the time who eventually became my wife, and we hadn't been tested at the time for STDs or HIV or anything like that. And so because of that entered my mind, and I'm like, oh crap, I have, just spiraled in, and I felt this certainty in my mind that I had HIV, and I had no reason to believe that that would be the case. There's just nothing but at that point, it could have been anything. It could have been any sort of fear in the world, but it just happened to be that, and it crippled me. I was paralyzed at that moment. I fell on the ground, and I was like in the fetal position, literally like just by myself in my apartment. And again, having never experienced that before, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what an anxiety attack was, or panic attack, or anxiety disorder at all. So yeah, and it continued on. I mean, eventually it like would come in waves where I would experience a panic attack. It would diminish or go away, but it was always there kind of underneath the surface in the form of this just constant dread. Mm-hmm. And after I got tested and realized I didn't have HIV, the next thing it latched onto something else. Oh my gosh, I have cancer.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, right? Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So it was just a constant stream over the course of those years. And the one thing that ended up helping with that for me was alcohol. So of course, over time, I continued to lean on that more as a crutch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So did that alcohol take away the symptoms of all the panic for you?
Yes, immediately. So when I drank, it took away that and it replaced it with this artificial confidence, or this, it's okay, Adam, this isn't real. And I was like, yeah, that's crazy. Why would I believe that? But it was also replaced with obviously the stuff that comes with drunkenness, like blackouts, lack of poor judgment. And so what would happen is when I would come to the next morning, the anxiety would be more so. So it would just be like this constant cycle. Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Was there a level to which you kind of didn't know what to do about the panic attacks? Like, are you supposed to tell anybody? I mean, as a guy, you're supposed to kind of like suppress that stuff, feelings, emotions, just do away with them and just suck it up and be a man. Like, was there a level to which you didn't even know how to handle it anyway?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was because I didn't know about the mental health issues or anything like that. I didn't think that anyone else really went through this. So I just thought I was kind of crazy, and I thought it was just, so I did kind of just keep it to myself. And I mean, I would see a doctor about some of these things, and I would say, I went to a doctor on occasion, and then they would just prescribe me medication. So I'd take the medication for a time, but obviously I was still drinking, and I didn't want to tell the doctor I was drinking, of course. So yeah, nothing ever really worked because I wasn't addressing the root problems.
But it worked for you like during that time, because like in the book, it kind of like seemed like that combination of alcohol and medication, you were like, okay, this just leveled me out. And one big thing I think for people listening, like that's a huge loop. And that's what a lot of these drugs do to people. And they can really help in a negative way, help you suppress these feelings of like high anxiety and your body shutting down. So that was almost, you created a whole new normal for you, and that was your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was totally new normal. And yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. The combination of the alcohol with the anxiety just meant that the more time I would spend drinking and intoxicating myself, the less time I would spend anxious. So that was the positive reinforcement it had on me.
So sometimes it's not about the being drunk. It's the state that you get of the calmness, and you're like, oh, this is what life should feel like.
Right.
The bliss, you could say, the fake bliss that you were getting from the alcohol.
Yeah. And that's probably huge for other people battling with addictions or anything. Like, that's probably the thing. It's not the alcohol itself or whatever drug. It's the euphoric, like, feeling that they get, that they think they're now in a natural state. And that's obviously a target that we're going to want to correct and fix and help people get through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really was the environment that was the problem for me. It wasn't, the alcohol itself just was exactly that. It was trying to treat a symptom, but the environment wasn't even my physical environment. It was just the environment that was happening in my mind. And that's what I needed to address. And one of the first most empowering things that happened to me with that is that I was able to give it a name. Though it would take many more years to actually overcome it. The fact that I could be validated in the fact that, hey, you have this thing, this anxiety disorder that millions of people are struggling with, that was powerful for me. And I finally learned about that when I did go into therapy later on into my 20s.
And what did they exactly diagnose you with? Did they say high anxiety, or did they kind of give you some other symptoms or prognosis?
Yeah, the initial one was a generalized anxiety disorder, just because that's kind of the catch-all of all of that. So
then they can't be wrong at that point, right?
right, yeah. And it really was. It made sense to me. But some of the effects of that anxiety were that I had an obsessive personality. I and that goes way back to my childhood, and I had things like the social anxieties and the panic attacks, and those were some of the offshoots of it.
I want to rewind a little bit and just help basically echo to anybody out there listening that is stuck in that cycle. Like at what point did it hit its culmination where you were just like, this is so bad. Like I have to switch up my pattern. Like you were compensating with the alcohol for so long that it like almost like winning fixes everything type of deal. Like you've had good days, so it kind of covered up the fact that you might not be doing it the right way. At what point did it kind of hit its point where you're like, I got to change this?
Yeah, there were a few points where in my mind I had said that to myself, like I can't do this anymore. I don't want to drink. And for a long time I didn't want to drink anymore because obviously the negative effects, and I felt like I was losing control. But going through that sobriety without like a complete 100% willingness and without the willingness to do whatever it took, I didn't stay sober. So there were a number of times where I did that and got sober for a few months at a time, and then just kind of fell back into it. But the time where it did reach that culmination was, over time I would set these rules for myself. I would say to myself, I'm not going to drink before 5 p.m. I'm not going to drink on the weekdays, or I'm not going to do anything like. And so I was kind of like this alcoholic gremlin, like setting all these rules for myself, or else I would be forced to reflect on the fact that I am a problem drinker. And one of the biggest rules that I always kept, which was don't drink and drive. And that was the biggest rule for me because it was so ingrained in my values that drinking and driving was so horrible, so abhorrent that I would just never do it. And then I did. And it culminated on that day where I got into a DUI accident, and thank God nobody was hurt, nobody was injured or anything like that. And I came to in the back of a police car, and experiencing that was just the most immense sense of dread and shame that I could have ever experienced. I didn't want to be on this planet anymore. I realized that I'm not only a danger to myself, which was okay by me up to that point, but I was a danger to other people. And I was doing more harm in this world than good. And reflecting on that, sitting in a jail cell, I just didn't want to be on this earth anymore. And that was a defining moment for me because it was so shameful that I really had two choices at that point. I had one choice was to just give into that urge and just say, I'm going to end it. I'm not going to be here anymore. I'm going to get out, or I'm going to get help. And I had been in the rooms of recovery before, though I never really connected. I never really felt like I had anything in common with those folks. And this was the first time I was like, yeah, I'm definitely one of the folks that belong there. I belong in those rooms of recovery. And so I had that complete willingness at that point because I was so scared of myself in that state at that point that I wanted to get help. And B, I wanted to live, and I wanted to be a functional human being at that point. So yeah,
that's really powerful. I really appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. Seriously.
And in the book, the build up to this, and I couldn't honestly when I opened this book and I read the first thing, and I think you're in like a porta potty, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I'm like, okay, but the build up in the book is amazing, and you did a great job of kind of really going through the steps of kind of back and forth of where you were. Like, okay, you were at these meetings, but you really didn't care and you couldn't relate to people. And then obviously at the point you just mentioned, at what point did you kind of feel like where reality blended with your like, hey, I'm going to get sober for a couple months and then go back? And did your reality, was it just a whole different world for you? Or
like when I was sober, was it a different world? Or
maybe I'll rephrase it. Like when you got sober and you're like, hey, I'm going to go back to it. Is that because like your old like your anxiety started creeping in again, and then you're like, okay, maybe I need to go back and feel better?
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. It was, some of it was that. I mean, some of it was a little bit of the anxiety, but a lot of it, I think, became the fact that I just, while I was not drinking, I never really got sober. Like I really never went through the process of transcending the desire to drink. And that's a big deal because
you just curbed it a little bit.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I put it on the side. I got the heat off, but I was still, the ism doesn't go away, as they say in the rooms of recovery. Yeah. It's just, I'm always an alcoholic, and I'll always have that problem. If I pick up another drink today, I'm right back at it. Fortunately, today I don't have the desire to drink, and I'm very grateful for that. But that doesn't mean that I won't have that desire at some point, and I have to have the tools to expect that. So.
And that's the dysfunctional love affair that you reference.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's a dysfunctional love affair where you feel like it's a part of you. And once you have that, once I had that bond, when I realized that it could relieve my anxiety so much, which I lived with, that bond was forged. And so I've had to replace that, and I've had to change that, and I've had to build the tools to, eliminate that desire, which was important for me. And then replacing that eventually with something that was more empowering, and recognizing that I'm an obsessive person. That doesn't go away, and I need an outlet for that. Was helpful.
So why not an Ironman?
Right.
So yeah, let's talk about that period now, if that's all right. Unless Eric, you had some questions.
Just one more, like what are your thoughts on, I know I'll talk about reality a lot, and I think this is a very ever-changing from person to person, but it's good to get kind of insight for people. How is your reality now? Like your perception of the world, your life, like what do you think that is compared to what it used to be?
That's a great question, and it's ever changing. I mean, as it always is with all of us. But the perspective that I have is changed. There's a constant feeling of hope for me that having experienced the things that I've experienced of absolute downs and the most thrilling highs, I know that both are still possible in my life. And in sobriety, I've had some amazing experiences, but I've also had some really, tragic and challenging ones. But that perspective has changed because during the difficult and challenging times previously, I would have drank. And now I don't have to. And that reality is so empowering for me that every time something challenging happens, my first instinct is, I got to have a drink. It's okay. Let's take it a step at a time. Let's just look at it from every piece, starting at the very, very beginning, first step. And that's really what sobriety taught me in those first steps is let's just take it one step at a time, to take it day by day, to take it right here and right now. So I guess my reality is when I feel like I'm doing things, feel like I'm doing things well, I'm absolutely present. But when I feel like I'm out of alignment and I'm just totally unbalanced, and that happens a lot for me still, I'm either living in the future or the past.
Yeah, I love that.
I think that's a tough thing nowadays for everyone. Because we live in this high-speed world, and a very easy way is to look towards something that's going to numb the pain, whether it's alcohol, drugs, marijuana, whatever it is. It could be people high-speeding on the highway because they think whatever feels good. Mm-hmm. To have that, what you just said, and kind of step back, I think for a lot of listeners, that is a huge to understand that this thing between our ears is a complex system, and we really need to respect it more than just trying to numbing the effects of it. So.
Yeah.
And you did that with one of the most torturing things in this world, Ironman.
Oh yeah.
What a way to ground yourself. Like, such a form of meditation is exercise, and you really drive that nail into your brain pretty much by doing an Ironman. Because I'm a firm believer, kind of like what you're talking about in between our ears here, is nothing can hurt you more than your own mind untrained, and nothing can comfort you more than your own mind trained. But I do want to kind of go back to what Eric was saying in terms of the training aspect. Like at when that point that we did hit sobriety and it actually stuck to, we'll say, like the first marathon. Forget Ironman right now. First marathon. What was that timeline?
Well, my first marathon was actually in an Ironman, so I never ran a marathon until I did my first Ironman.
He went straight to the Ironman.
That's great.
So I guess where did that that concept come from? I know you said you saw it on TV, but I mean, I wouldn't even go there. And I like to like exercise and stuff, but I mean, to me, I probably still wouldn't go there. But
Yeah.
to be like, hey, that's what I want to do. I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah, it was really the series of events and how they laid out for me, because as I mentioned, I am always kind of an obsessive person, and if I have my mind on something, it's like, yeah, I want to do that thing. But when I first saw the Ironman World Championship, and I saw the NBC broadcast, which if you haven't seen it, it's just like this amazingly well produced thing with a lot of different special interest stories of people that overcame these significant challenges to be there and race this race. And so I saw that and on television, maybe like 2006. And when I watched it, I was still in the grips of alcoholism and all that kind of stuff, and I was drinking. And
I think that one was funny. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I cracked a beer and just kept going. I was like, most people would do that. Any other person in America would just be like, "Oh, that's great, boom."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
The fact that you remember that and like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, totally remembered it because of what I told myself. And when I watched it, I was just so inspired. I said, I would love to do something like that. That looks amazing. And then my mind just immediately went to, you can't do that. Come on. And then I just cracked a beer, went on, smoked a cigarette, went on feeling what I felt, and then just never thought about it again. But when I got sober in 2012, after that first year of sobriety, there's a saying that some of the elders in sobriety or in the recovery rooms would say, which was, don't make any major life changes in your first year of sobriety. And what I heard was, when you hit a year of sobriety, make a major life change. And so I felt like I was obligated to do something. I just had to do something big. So I was unhealthy at the time. I was taking care of my mind by getting sober. And that was something that I never thought that I could do, was get sober. But I was also joining the guys outside and having cigarettes and things like that while we were, taking breaks and eating big bags of peanut M&Ms. And I remembered, so I was recovering from shoulder surgery, and I was thinking to myself, what do I want to do with my life going forward? I want to be healthy, and I've had this mental shift. I want a physical shift as well. And that's kind of what brought it back into my mind. Was I remembered watching it at that time, and I was like, yeah, maybe I can do that. Instead of thinking like, I can't do that right away, my mind went to like, well, what if I could? And then it really excited me. It really lit a fire under me. It's like, what if I could do an Ironman? And I was like, wow, what if I could? And so I immediately started researching, how do I sign up for the Ironman World Championship? And
qualify.
Yeah. Sure enough, I found out pretty quick you have to qualify, and it's a very challenging process. So I did a little more research, and I ended up signing up for the Ironman Los Cabos, which was going to be about a little more than a year away from that point. And then I just kind of started building the parachute on the way down.
Well, I found it very interesting that when you went to sign up, you couldn't, because you were too far out. Like, you have to be what is it, 6 or 3 months out from the race to do like a half?
Yeah. So there was two parts to that. So I had to be a year out from the race to be able to sign up for it. But the coaching part, I wanted to find a coach as well to help me with that. And so I was looking for how do I find a coach for an Ironman? And I wanted to look for somebody that experienced it. And I came across Mark Allen, who was a 6-time world championship. And he'd always struggled in racing in Kona, until one year he started working with a guy named Phil Maffetone, who had this crazy heart rate method, which was really simple, but really, really crazy low heart rate. And he did that, and then went on to win Kona 6 times after that. And it was just, so I was inspired by that story, because it was like, okay, he was doing easy workouts. He was doing easy aerobic workouts. And I was always thinking, no pain, no gain, always go hard or go home. And I was always, right. But I was always hurting myself because I'm not an athlete. You are. I am now. Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
But I looked up how to work with Mark Allen, who happened to be a coach at that time. And he had this program, but it had to be like 6 months out from the race. So I realized I'd have to kind of figure out how to do it on my own first.
Is that the maximum aerobic function test they were talking about by Phil Maffetone?
That's right. Yeah. Phil Maffetone. 180 minus your age is your maximum aerobic heart rate. And you're basically supposed to do 90% of your training underneath that heart rate. And it's ridiculously easy.
Which is very interesting because a lot of times we think like marathon runners, they're up by their threshold, they're training, but they're trained so well.
Yeah.
So it's like, it makes sense when I was reading that. I'm like, yeah, he's great.
Right.
but it's, as you saw the progress, you're like, wow, this actually works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then for just your aerobic system, just your fat burning system, that slow burn system.
Yeah.
So you can keep going for that duration of a race.
Yeah, it totally resonated with me too, just because like I was saying, I had always struggled with the hard workouts. I was always doing these 90-day really intense programs. I won't name what they are, but
we can say it.
But I was always getting injured or burned out on that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So when I heard about that heart rate training, I was like, okay, I started doing some of it and I was like, okay, it's ridiculously easy, but I also realized that I'm feeling more energized. I'm feeling like it's meditative. It's really clearing my mind. And it seems like this is a great supplement for somebody like me who is high anxiety, not necessarily coming from an athletic background, doesn't have a strong base of fitness. And so building on that, I was able to see gains really, really quickly. And those quick gains were just really rewarding for me and just really big confidence boosters. So that was a super helpful way for me to start getting involved in fitness.
Now, when you first started training with this and not doing this and kind of getting on the trainer and the bike and all that stuff, were there points and times where you're like, hey, I want to quit or I don't want to do this anymore? And kind of going, because it sounded like in the book, you had a fixed mindset at one point, and now you're into this growth mindset. If you can you kind of recall that transition of how it pulled you into this more growth mindset where we try to get most people to be rather than just kind of be like, I'm stuck here?
Yeah. It really came from my experience in recovery from alcoholism, because when I first got in there, that's exactly it. I had that fixed mindset. I said, I can't do it without alcohol. I can't do it. But going through sobriety and actually finding that community of people who've done it, that was my evidence that it's possible. You have these people that are getting sober after being alcoholics for many, many years. And me just basically finding the mentors or finding the people that I could learn from in that regard. And that gave me a template for how to proceed with anything else. So I immediately developed this reference point of achieving something that I didn't think that I could achieve in the past. And then it made me realize, well, what else could I do? So that was the mindset shift into the growth mindset of now I want to do this thing. And then having put the money down, like spending the $750 on the Ironman and booking the hotels and stuff like that, that was the accountability piece, saying that I'm doing this now.
Oh, don't forget the bike. I mean, I know bike, people right? who ride. And those bikes are not cheap. So when I read that part, I was like, I know my friends do this.
Right. There was that element. Yeah. That it was just like, make the investments too. And once you spend the money, you're bought into it.
Which is very good though, because a lot of times that making that investment and of course, having a support team, your wife, your family, that goes a long way to say, now, if you're obsessive, I'll say I'm there. If you didn't do that, you would be like, I'm letting them down. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. So I would have the same kind of sensation, like, oh, I'm letting them down, so I have to complete this, which is good. But then also, like, I think people get confused because they think once they're in the growth mindset, you're done, it's good. But that's not the case. One part of the book that kind of resonated with me is when you're in the water and you're like, it's dark and people might be swimming over you and that anxiety kicks in. I'm not the best in water either. So, and your fears came back. Walk us through kind of how your training with your heart rate, your breathing, all that played into a role of controlling your neurological system to calm yourself down and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, and that's an important point, is that just because I gave up the alcohol, I started getting healthy and things like that, doesn't make the anxiety disorder go away. It's still there and it still creeps in and it still exists. And when I'm in the water, even to this day, open water swimming is still it's still a frightening thing for me. I have to get myself into the mindset to be able to do it and do it effectively. And that means building up to it. So that's one of the ways that I did that was to recognize first that fear is not really a foe to us. Fear is a friend of ours. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's magnified, sometimes it's irrationally magnified, but it is still a friend. And sometimes that anxiety can be a superpower, because for me, that anxiety can also manifest itself as a hyper awareness of my surroundings, an obsessiveness, something where I can turn that into something that is powerful for me to continue with that discipline. And it was really the fear, a lot of the fear that drove me to continue to push past that initial anxiety, because I knew that putting the money down, having the race coming up, I was going to need to swim 2.4 miles in the ocean in Cabo San Lucas. I had to train for it. I had to get myself over that anxiety. So gradually immersing myself in that process, finding again that community of people, recognizing that I wasn't alone in that fear, because a lot of people have that fear in the water. That was really empowering for me to be able to push past it and ultimately conquer it.
And then there's one, probably my favorite quote of the book is you talk about the comfort zone, and Matt and I have always talked about it. And you said it's an ever-changing target, always yielding towards greater weakness, atrophy, and regression. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, I was like, that's what it is. And it's always in life, there's always this. It's always going to be that. And our brains want the comfort zone. It wants to go there. It wants the easy route. And I think like the biggest takeaway of that whole book, I mean, someone could read halfway through the book till you get to AA and be like, wow, okay, I get it. This is it. But then you take it into training and you understand that training is I wouldn't say the exact same thing, but a very similar situation of, okay, this is going to be tough. We're going to regress. We're going to progress. We're going to go through all the steps.
And the aspect of the training, same thing with your anxiety. Like it never gets easier. You just get better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's such a key point, is that pushing past that comfort zone, just 5%. And that's one of the great things I read recently was from a book called The Art of Impossible. And in that book, Stephen Kotner, I think maybe is his name. I apologize if I get the name wrong, but the guy who wrote it, but he says that just going 4% beyond your comfort zone is the sweet spot of where you want to go, because that's how you continue that growth. If you go too far, you're pushing too far and you're burning yourself out. If you don't go far enough, you're facing that atrophy again and you're kind of shrinking downward. So I love that description of it, just pushing yourself to the point beyond your comfort zone where you're growing, and you can constantly do that. And there's this area of fulfillment that you can experience in that too.
So in today's training, if you're still training and whatever, let's say hard workouts you're doing, when that comfort zone, you get to the edge, and your brain, what do you start to talk to yourself or tell yourself when you get to that point? Because we all get to the point on whether we're on a bike, a weight training session, or a workout where there's two voices. It's like, keep going, or it's like, hey, I'm done. I want to stop. In your head, what does it go through?
And when he said bike, he means a fan bike, because I'm
a big Aerodon bike guy.
Yeah, I do mine on the bike trainer with Zwift and Wahoo. But yeah, so it kind of depends on what the comfort zone I'm looking at is. So if it's a comfort zone of getting beyond a fear, a lot of times I'll have a mantra or a breathing rhythm that I'll follow. So breathing is really helpful in that regard. I found that before an activity like that, doing some Wim Hof breathing really calms me down. I love that. I can't say enough about that. Yeah, I love it. But yeah, even just like the 10 deep breaths is super simple in that, and making sure that I'm focusing on my breath while I'm doing the activity, like a swim, and telling myself a mantra. Like just smooth and strong, and just constantly doing that while I'm swimming. Smooth, strong, or something along those lines. But sorry, my mic just fell down a little bit. Sorry about that. Oh, that's all right. And then but if it's more of like I've just got to get through it because it's going to be painful for the next 5 minutes, then it's like music on as loud as I can, the fast music where even a
metal
mantra
music.
there. Yeah, exactly. Just power through. Yeah. And that's really it.
Perfect.
That's awesome.
And I love asking people questions because everyone has their different things, and you can relate it to life too. There's certain times where you're going to have to crank the dial and the music up and just, hey, we're going to go through this. And there's other times you step back and breathe and passively work through this. So I think you can take a lot from an exercise hour or 3 hours, whatever your training session is, and understand that you can apply the same neuro complex to the real world. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
So along with that, you went to, so the end goal was Kona. That was your sweet one. So we had to get there. So that's the hard part. Where did we start once you got your first race down?
So when I got my first race, so that was a great experience, which was my first race was a sprint because I wanted to have that first experience. And even that was a little bit frightening for me, but in the spirit of pushing myself 5% beyond my comfort zone, I did the sprint. I finished maybe within like the top third of my age group. And I realized, okay, so now I'm a triathlete. Now I actually did it. I finished respectably, so I can middle of the pack and respectably, so I can continue on and actually now I know I can do this. Let's level up to the Olympic, and then the half Ironman ultimately, and then the full. So when I got to the full, I had a few races under my belt. I knew what to expect. I'd swam races in the ocean, so. And I overswam the distance. I'd overbiked the distance. I hadn't quite run the distance yet. I'd never run a marathon, but I was confident at least that I could finish the race. And that's what I had was 3 goals. I had the goal of qualifying for Kona, which was the pie in the sky goal. The secondary goal, which was finish in the daylight. And then the third goal, which was just finish. So that at least in one way I'd be winning unless I couldn't finish for whatever reason. I ended up finishing in the daylight on that one. And again, kind of in the top, maybe 30% of the age group of my first Ironman. And it was an incredible experience where a lot of people right after they finish will say, I'm never doing that again. For
Right.
me, it was like, when's the next one? And I think I'd already actually signed up for the next one by that point. So I was already like bought into like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to keep trying for it. And so when I finished, I finished in a time of 10:45. And the Kona qualifiers were probably around like 9:30, 9:45 was the last one. So I realized at that point is like, okay, I'm 10% away. I'm just 10% away from qualifying. So I think I can do that. And if I could just tweak some things, some small changes will get me there over time. And so over the period of the next 6 races and 4 years, I ended up qualifying in my 7th race in Santa Rosa.
And what was that feeling when you ran across the line and you realized you qualified?
It was incredible. I was actually being filmed for a show called Ironman Quest For Kona, which I'd auditioned for a year earlier on the urgence of my wife. And what was amazing about that was the whole journey started with me watching the Ironman on television and being inspired and saying, no way, I can't do that. And then it culminated at this point, many years later, over a decade later, me crossing the finish line in Santa Rosa with a camera crew back there filming me crossing the finish line while my daughter puts the medal over my neck. It was the most amazing experience ever because starting that race, before I even started, I was questioning whether or not I could do it. Even after
still having those fears coming in and everything, right?
Yeah, because even after the 6 previous races of doing all those races and doing it, I looked at the swim and I just thought to myself, even then, my mind was telling myself, I can't do this. And yeah, ultimately my just conversations with my wife, who's always been my biggest support, my biggest partner, and just walking down to the transition, crossing that threshold and just kind of forcing a game face on, I was able to do it.
And you make it sound easy. Well, I wouldn't say easy, but from there, you did these races, you did 7. But when people get the book, and you should 100% get the book and read it, it's like there are times where you had GI issues. I mean, it opens up with you in a porta potty, and I'm like, oh, all right, I got to keep reading, see what happens. There's other times where you drank, was it too much glucose? And you caused GI distress. There was a lot of times within those races that you could have just been like, hey, this is not worth it. This is where I'm going to end it. And I don't want to do this again. But you were like, no, you saw that end goal. And then getting to Kona, I mean, how was that experience? I mean,
it was incredible. Yeah, it was amazing, and it was still frightening at the same time. I mean, the anxiety was even high then, because and to your point about the context of everything being imperfect, or all these things happening during the race. It's what I love about the Ironman distance and the longer races is that you're bound to experience some challenge, and you're bound to have to address that and figure out a way through it or past it. And that's what I love about it, because every single one of those races is a growing experience. Every single one is different. Whatever plans you have going into the race, you're going to get punched in the face on them and have to adapt and change in some way. And that's what I love about it. But Kona itself, getting there was really the journey. And that was, I considered that one to be a victory lap, but I definitely wanted to finish it. And one of the things that frightened me about it was the idea that it was a non-wetsuit swim. Wetsuits give you great buoyancy while you're in the water. So there's a little bit of comfort, a little bit of a crutch there. But this was going to be a non-wetsuit swim in the Pacific Ocean with swells and currents and all that good stuff. So I got there early because I wanted to experience the whole race. And throughout that week, one day it would be super rough, like there'd be big swells and it would be choppy and all this kind of stuff. And the next day it would be super calm. So it would mess with me all week like that. And I would listen to that. And we made the mistake of booking a condo that was right on the water. At any other time, a condo right in the water on Hawaii would be awesome. Yeah. Not this time. Because the night before, we were
staring at the
just listening to the waves.
Like a horror movie.
Yeah, it was tough. I didn't sleep at all that night, but yeah, waking up the morning of the race, getting into transition, it was just this amazing feeling. And when you get into transition, when you get into the water, everything just kind of calms down. And that's what was kind of beautiful about it. I got in the water and I really took in all the surroundings. I said, I want to remember this because I know the finish line is going to be hard to remember. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be exhausted, but I want to float here and I want to look around. I want to see all the people on the seawall, the helicopters overhead, everything here. I want to just take that in and remember it. And I'm really grateful that I did that, because to this day, I remember that feeling of just before the cannon went off.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But you don't even remember crossing the finish line. No, I'm kidding.
Bits and pieces.
Yeah, right.
You don't remember the end part. You always remember the struggle or the effort to get there. And I think that's more important, whether it's me and my certifications or Matt, whatever you've done. Yeah, you realize you've done it, but then you look back and you see the perspective of how you got there. And that's the most important thing. And that's the stuff we'll remember.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It was all about the journey. I mean, standing in the top of the finish line, I have photos of me at the finish line, which was amazing because I could actually see myself and say, there I am. I don't really remember that necessarily, but I remember everything leading up to that point. That was just like,
happens.
Yeah, but and that's the most important part, because that's the part of overcoming. It's really not the finish line. I mean, I like to think of a finish line as a new starting line, because if you don't have a starting line at that finish line, you're going back to that atrophy. You're going back to that sense of giving into comfort and going back.
Comfort, yeah.
Yeah. You're
so
Al
speaking
Bundy.
of that, where are you right now? Are you still doing triathlons? I mean, has your finish lines keep pushing? What are we going nowadays?
Yeah, so I have taken off triathlons for the last couple of years simply because of COVID. I use it as a good chance to like kind of take a step back and learn to miss it, because that's a good thing. But I've been exploring what kind of adventure challenge I'd like to do next. I'm looking at the Ultraman, which is the 3-day event around, that's ultra triathlons. I would love to do something like a 100-mile run and one of my biggest bucket list items is riding my bike across the United States. I just love to do that and just take my time with it. But ultimately what I'm focused on now is really putting this story out there and trying to help through Extra Life, my company, help beginner triathletes or beginner athletes get into the sports get into a sport of triathlon as something they may not have thought that they could do in the past, but getting into that starting line of a sprint triathlon, because if they can get there and achieve that, that's just that first step toward whatever else they would want to achieve.
So you've liked it so much. Now you're a coach.
Yes.
Welcome to the coaching side of life.
Right.
So tell us about that, like your company, what you're doing with it, and how are you finding these future triathletes and turning them into athletes?
Yeah, so I've been working I've been a coach actually for a few years now, helping with primarily Ironman athletes, Ironman triathletes who want to, at any level, trying to just get better, find their PRs. And more recently, I've been focused on trying to put together a platform to help absolute beginners, people who don't know much about the sport, just try to navigate those first 12 weeks to get to their first sprint finish line. And that's a relatively new thing that I'm working on trying to get, because that's where I came from. When I first started, it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of trying to find the right kind of coach or trying to find the right kind of information. And it took a good 6 months to get to that point where I could finish a triathlon and not having the confidence that I would really need. But
I think a lot of us start here. I mean, I was a skinny kid in the weight room and wasn't really good at sports. I think, Mac, you have the same kind of upbringing in sports. Like, we see this as like, we want to help younger kids and other people because we now understand the capacity of it. I think that's the best part about coaching.
Yeah.
So for sure. We definitely don't step on each other's toes at all, because we don't specialize with Ironman athletes. And if I were to get a starter package,
I've trained one in my life.
If I was to get a starter package, like a beginner's package for an Ironman athlete, it better have a kickboard in there and some water weenies for me.
Yeah, for sure. That's always the challenging part is helping people to get past that fear part of it, which is another thing that I'd like to work on some days is figuring out that anxiety piece for people. But it's like different for everybody, as you say. Yeah,
the psychological part of coaching.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
Isn't also the story of an Ironman, like a cyclist, a swimmer, and a runner sat down at a bar and they argued which one was harder, and that's how they came up with the Ironman. So speaking to someone who's done all three, which I guess we won't say harder, but which is most enjoyable for you? Which comes most naturally?
Most enjoyable was the bike. I started making the gains there, and it actually became, and it really goes between the bike and the run on the two that I enjoyed the most. But the bike was the most enjoyable, just because there was an element of the thrill in there. There's just an element of, that's where I started to excel, and that's where a lot of the engineering pieces that I enjoy start to come out in there. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And then I want to also bring it back for a second. Like, when did you first think about writing a book?
I started right after I qualified for Kona. I started writing it, and
Nice.
and it took me about 4 years to write. A lot of different drafts, a lot of different finishes on it. So it took me a little while to get through it.
Did you have it planned out as it kind of flowed in the book, or did you kind of just start writing and then it, like, you pieced it together and because you do a great job of kind of flipping back and forth from runs to, like, you're bringing it back to life. So you're kind of like waiting for the next chapter to see what the next endeavor of a race is, and then it gets back into chronological order.
Yeah. I actually did. I wrote the Fear and Loathing in a Mexican Porta Potty. That was the very first chapter, and that was the first thing I wrote. So that kind of set the tone for the book, and so I let that kind of guide it. And then I had a series of outlines, but I ultimately just kind of wrote the stories, or I wrote the bulk of the book, and then I kind of added some pieces later, and then I actually didn't add on the very distant background into my childhood until much later. So it was kind of pieced together over time.
And it was interesting because obviously we got your information and I watched the NBC thing first, and I was like, oh, it's probably going to be a book about a triathlete, which is interesting because I don't really work with them. And then I'm started reading. I'm like, this is more of a mindset, human behavior book than anything else. Like, yes, it talks about racing and techniques and stuff, but I was like, this is completely different what I thought it was going to be. And that's what I love about some books. And is this coming out soon?
Yeah, it's actually coming out tomorrow. So by the time this airs, it'll probably be out.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
So, and
all right.
It's one of those.
We're honored to get to interview you.
Thanks.
It's not these in-depth. I have some very in-depth psychology books and stuff, but it's someone that the average person can relate to. Anyone who goes through any struggle can sit here and read this book. And most people, I would assume, are going to be like, wow, my life does not even compare to that. Like, what are the things in my life that I'm having anxiety over? Might not be that, but I understand the process and the track here. How do I change it like you did? And I think that's very, very the aspect of the book that kind of really grabbed me into it. Was like, wow, okay, you kind of take a step back and you have a whole different perspective of what someone's going through in their journey and how you could help them or reach out to someone that needs that help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the goal. I really wanted to make sure that people that are not athletes, that aren't in that world, understand that this is something that affects lots of people, and that there's a way to transcend it. Not a way to get over it or anything like that. But I like the word transcend, because that doesn't mean that that anxiety goes away, or it doesn't mean that the isms go away or the character goes away. It just means that you learn to transcend it. You learn to rise above it, and you learn to even make it a superpower. And that once I could recognize that, it was just like the world was the oyster, and I became more unstoppable. Because
And I do like in the book,
whoever came up with the title is spot on. I think that's kind of like the shifting gears or the transforming and changing that mindset, because I think a lot of times people look at athletes like yourself and just say, oh man, he's got something that I don't have, or he has something that I would never be able to create. Like he's fearless, he's tough. And I just love the quote, and it just makes me think of it just talking to you, is fearlessness is not operating without any fear. It's operating in spite of having fear.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's an important thing that I've always tried to convey to people, is that there isn't really, even Laird Hamilton, who you would think is the most fearless person on the planet. He always explains that whenever he gets clobbered by a wave or things like that, or he wipes out really badly, he gets right back up and he goes after it again, because at that moment he's afraid. And it's not that he's not afraid. It's that he wants to get past the fear and go for it anyway and keep going. Otherwise the fear will conquer him. Right. And that's kind of what that I take that to heart, because it's not about being fearless. It's about being courageous. It's about facing those fears. And that's what courage is. A lack of fear is psychopathy, or whatever you call it.
Sociopath, right? Yeah, right. Disconnected from reality. But you mentioned Laird Hamilton. I'm a big quote guy, and one of his quotes is, "Make sure your worst enemy doesn't live between your own two ears." So
I love that.
Yeah. We're just all about the whole mindset thing, and I think it's such a crucial part that people miss out on.
The shifting gears can go forward and backwards. And as he's talking about isms, and I think this is a great way, because a lot of times people think that, oh, if I go to a psychologist or I take medication, I'm healed. And you nailed it on the head. You're not. And we realize we always have to deal with these isms. And you mention it many times in the books as to kind of pull someone back and be like, yeah, you're still an alcoholic. Like, that won't ever change you. The ism is what you can control, and controlling that in life, whatever isms we have in life, we all have them, is understanding that that's never going to go away. And I think a lot of humans think we should just be this one standard type of way and everything's going to go away and it's not coming back. Well, yeah, that finish line's there, and then the next finish line is going to come. So I really like that aspect of the book and the title.
Thank you very much.
So I was going to ask you, have you ever had your lactate threshold measured?
I have not. No. Yeah, I haven't.
I'd be curious. You're probably at like some crazy number where Eric and I would be like laying over in pain.
I don't know. It's been a while since I've been in full Ironman training mode, so I think my fitness is not as great as it was. But
are you different aspects of fitness? Are you doing more strength training and different other stuff?
No, right now I'm kind of back in the aerobic training mode now. So just, complete preseason kind of stuff. I have some races toward the end of the year. So July, working toward Ironman 70.3 Oregon. And then I'm going to get back into the triathlon world and then race Ironman Arizona in November. So
as long as you didn't say, hey, I'm not doing anything and I'm taking time off, we're good.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I never could. It's just, it's something I always got to be doing.
Yep. You mentioned mantras earlier. Do you meditate? Do you do any transcendental meditation or Zen Buddhism or anything like that?
I do meditation. I don't know if it's transcendental. To be honest, I haven't dug that deep into it. So primarily what I do is I want to sit quietly and I want to just explore my thoughts and kind of my practice is, because my mind is always going and I can't quiet that down. I just want to practice trying to remove myself or step back from the thoughts and just kind of let them go by and see them. Yeah. So that's my practice. But every morning I start the day with Wim Hof breathing. That's just, like, again, I'll just say that's the big thing.
Yeah, now, are you going in the ice too with this?
I am. Cold shower every morning. Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. It's Colorado cold shower.
Cold plunge. Yeah. And then I always like to ask people, what's your favorite lift, if you have one?
My favorite lift? Oh, yeah. I like to lift myself out of the pool every time I get in the pool after I'm done. No, no. I guess, I mean, I'm assuming, the strength training lifts.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm old school. I like the bench press. I think that's.
Hey, you got arms and chest, like, got to look good when you're running and on the bike. Hey,
that's right. Yeah. I'm working everything else too much. I got to look good by the finish
line. Yeah, right.
I mean, you get off.
You're gonna make it there. You just got to make sure you look good when you get there.
That's right. Yeah.
And I heard you. So go ahead.
I did like the video. Your audition tape was hysterical. So I read that part in the book, and I stopped and I had to go to YouTube and watch it. And you're like, oh, you're doing everything in a swimsuit gear. I was like, this is amazing.
Well, yeah, because I was that's the thing. I can never look badass doing anything. Like,
that's not true.
I mean,
that's not true.
Yeah,
you could probably watch highlights and be like, oh, this guy's cool. I could watch highlights of this guy, because I'm never going to do a triathlon. I guarantee it. I would fall apart. I'm not aerobically built, but that's pretty badass of what you did.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I just realized I couldn't look like Michael Phelps doing an audition video, so I had to be funny.
Work your angle, play to your strengths.
That's right. Yeah.
You threw out a Mike Tyson quote earlier, so just curious, do you have a favorite quote? Maybe one that just comes to mind after talking today.
That is a good quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face is a good
one.
Right.
That was one you threw out earlier.
Yeah. And the other one, I wish I had written one down, because I don't have one off the top of my head. Yeah. I'll just say something a quote that I just try to live by when I'm with regard to how I train my athletes, is to train with the mindset of a pro, but the attitude of the final finisher. And the reason I like that one is because if you're training like that with the mindset of a pro, you're always learning to elevate your life and focus on that growth mindset. But when you have the attitude of the final finisher, if you ever watch an Ironman, the two happiest people in a race are the first place finisher and the last place finisher. And the last place finisher got there and they're thrilled because they just finished an Ironman.
That'd be
but I mean, that's the thing, that they're thrilled because they finished it, and they finished it in the cutoff. They're happier, and sometimes they're even happier than the first place finisher. Right. And
because it means something to them. That is something that is important to them, whatever it is.
Absolutely. And that's the perspective I want people to recognize, is that when you're doing something like that, and anybody can do it, I truly believe that anybody can do it. But when they finish an Ironman, or when they finish a race, or even a triathlon, they're doing something that 99.9999% of the people in the world will never do. And that's something to just celebrate.
That's a great percentage to be in, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Adam, it was great having you. Where can people find your book, and where can people find some triathlon training?
So the book is on Amazon. So you can just search Shifting Gears from Anxiety and Addiction to a Triathlon World Championship. I'm sure you can just type in Adam Hill Shifting Gears and you'll get it. And then for anything else that I might be doing, coaching or speaking or anything along those lines, you can find me at adamhilltri.com. That's adamhilltri.com. And
we'll include that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Adam. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome. I really appreciate it.
I don't know if you do any remote training with your triathlon athletes, but just to kind of like share notes in terms of our approaches, any technology that's out there that you guys are using, we'd love to hear about.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty low tech as far as that's concerned, but yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I'm always happy to share notes, and looking for options with strength training for endurance athletes and things like that is helpful.
That means he's going to kill me on a bike.
Yeah.
Okay.
Won't be hard for him to do. Even just him talking like, I'm not really in Ironman condition right now. I'm like, you would smoke us on a bike easily.
Yeah. Well, you'd smoke me in anything else, so that's all good.
That's the best part of the different disciplines and different athletes. We're all good at certain things, and you take things from everything. We can't be good at everything, and everyone's got their niche, and that's the best part of this world. We're
Absolutely.
always learning like how to train certain athletes or certain general population depending on what they want.
Right. Yeah. I know that. Yeah, I definitely can't compete in ball sports. I've tried that in the past and just didn't work.
I would say there's always a sport or competition for someone out there if they're not good at it, right? You can 100% do it. And with triathlons or even marathons or whatever, like you buy a bike, you can run, you can swim, and it's very simple to do. It's not like you need thousands of dollars of exercise equipment or bars or whatever.
Yeah.
And playing it fast and loose with the word simple.
Well, it's simple. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. It's
that's why I was historically a soccer player, because it was more of like a walk, jog, sprint. So after you just exerted yourself, you usually had some time to catch your breath.
Yeah. I've heard that soccer players will run a half marathon over the course of a game, though. Is that true?
For the professionals and the size of those pitches, I think, I would say, like 12 to 13 miles. Wow. Yeah, that sounds about right.
But it's not always like running. So there's like jogging, walking. So they'll cover the distance, and it's still, I'm not taking anything away from them, but it's not like a straight 13 marathon pace at 6 minutes. So they'll cover the distance, but I always like to get in the energy systems are way different because we're asking a lot of different things, but it's still amazing what they'll cover in a field match
in
or
90 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, great. It was great chatting with you, Adam. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate it, guys. This was awesome. Yeah, you guys have a great show. And I was really honored to be here. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate
Adam.
to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. Anytime. And I'll look forward to hearing from you soon.
Sounds good.
Take care, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Think Fitness Life podcast. For more information on additional podcasts or YouTube videos or blogs, you can check out our website. That's www.thinkfitnesslife.com, all one word. And if you're looking for more additional services other than just the do-it-yourself approach, we offer programming, monitoring, and training, where you can get additional information on that at our website as well. Or you can send us a message at thinkfitnesslife, all one word, @gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.